Say when. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Does everybody hear me? No. We'll start the meeting now. But before I do, I need to read out the meeting statement, so bear with me. In accordance with the Openness of Local Bodies Regulations 2014, this meeting is being live streamed and may otherwise be recorded, filmed or communicated on other media platforms. The recording of this meeting will be made available on the Council's YouTube channel shortly after the meeting. Both councillors and officers in attendance are reminded to make full use of and to speak clearly into the microphones available at all times. A reminder that mobile phones should be turned off or put on silent mode. Those present at the meeting should refrain from taking phone calls. Thank you. Go on straight on to the agenda. But before we do, just for the benefit of who can't see very well there, can we identify who's here and who's present at the meeting, please? Samuel, can I ask you to?
Yes, we have Rashpal Sohal, Connie Campbell, Chris Eyre, David Gill, Grant Patterson and Paul Harvey.
Thank you. I've got on the table Councillor Geoffrey Coffin.
Councillor Sharon Morris.
Councillor David Lloydall.
Councillor Kevin Lloydall. I chair this particular meeting. We've got officers in the front. Thank you. Do you want to say who you are for the tape?
Tracy Bingham, Strategic Director and Section 151 Officer.
Thank you.
Mark Watkins, Internal Audit.
Adam Hunt, Democratic and Electoral Services Officer.
And Samuel Ball, Assistant Solicitor.
Thank you, everybody. I do appreciate that. Again, back on the agenda. Item 1, any apologies for absence, please?
Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Joshi and Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. Item 2, appointment of any substitutes.
None have been received, Chair.
Declarations of interest on item 3. No? No declarations of interest. Item 4, minutes of the previous meeting. Comments to read, confirm and sign the minutes of the previous meeting in accordance with Rule 19 Part 4 of the Constitution. Any comments? Can I move those meetings from the chair?
Move.
All those in favour? Thank you. The ayes have it. Moving on. Item 5, the action list arising from the previous minute. I understand there's no action list arising from the previous minute, so we can move on to item 6, petitions and deputations.
None have been received, Chair.
Thank you. And then we're on to item 7, the external audit progress report March 2022, pages 6 to 23. Who's taking this, please?
Sorry, Corey, off you go. Sorry, Chair. I'm going to do an introduction of the report. This report asks committee to note the 2 recommendations regarding the audit of the Council's 2020-21 Statement of Accounts and the update of the audit. And in the body of the report, it highlights that there are certain target deadlines to meet with regards to publishing and auditing the accounts, which have been amended by legislation due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And Grant Thornton External Audit Progress Report is shown in the attached Appendix 1. And at this point, I'd like to now hand you over to Grant Patterson to take us through Appendix 1, please.
Thank you, comment. Grant.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. I'm joined today by Paul Harvey, who's the Audit Manager, and I'll take you through the report as it is, but Paul may be able to give a slightly more updated input to the meeting itself. So basically, if I take you to, I think it's page 12 of your pack, which is progress at March 2022. As members are aware,
We are still sort of working through finalising our audit of 2021. I'm pleased to say that we're making progress. And we're nearing the end of that work now on the financial statements. At the time of writing our report, there were still a number of queries outstanding. The main ones to bring to your attention were we're seeking evidence of a long-term debtor for a company that the authority did set up, but then wound up, and it's still a long-term debtor showing in the accounts. We were still working through the reconciliation of the collection fund accounts to the general ledger. And then also we're looking at the finalisation agreement of any proposed amendments through to the final account. So basically when we've got the updated financial statements. As I say, officers are working with us and working through these to complete our work, and we're aiming to complete our work. We say in April there. I mean, the idea is that we will hopefully complete by Easter, which will then give officers time to update the final financial statements. And then, as we said there, we will bring our final audit findings report to the June audit committee and look to sign off the accounts after that. This has been a sort of delayed audit, but I think we are now with the appointment of Rush Powell and the help of Commie and the finance team, we are getting towards the end of the process, and hopefully we'll be able to sign off very shortly. I suppose we're also here looking ahead into 21-22. We're not going to actually start our work on 21-22 till we finish 2021 in detail. And as have you been alerted to there, the deadline or the publication deadline for this year has been pushed back to the end of November for local government for 21-22 accounts. The proposal to look as it is now is that there isn't a deadline for 22-23 set yet, but by 23-24 they're hoping to get back to, they're planning to get back to an end of September reporting deadline. So we won't quite be going back to July, but I think when the sort of new PSA audit contracts kick in, the idea is that the end of September then becomes the normal sign-off date for financial statements. I'm sure as members are aware, as well as the opinion on financial statements, we also look at value for money, and in that sense, because of the delay on the audits, we have dispensation to complete our value for money work for 2021-22 within 3 months of completion of the opinion statements. We will be aiming to do that. I think what we'll probably do in practice is look to wrap it up along with our work on 21-22 as well. So we will be reporting after the end of June in terms of value for money. If there are any immediate reporting items, though, I am duty bound to bring them to you as soon as they're available. At this point in time, I don't see any immediate reporting requirements under the code. Moving on to the next page, page 13, in terms of other work that we've been doing in relation to the council, just to confirm, we finished our work on your housing benefit subsidy claim, and that was submitted at the end of February or by 7th of March. And we also certified the council's pool of capital receipts claims. So both of those pieces of work have been completed and submitted. And we have had an introductory meeting with the new Section 151 officer, and we provided workshops to officers. We make some general comments around audit fees there. We will be looking at where the final fee for 2021 lands, and I will be discussing the 21-22 fee. We're still just finalising discussions with PSAA around that in terms of as all firms will be doing. And I'm not in a position yet to confirm what those final proposals might be, but they should be coming. We should be able to come to those shortly. And then that's really just summarised on page 14 in terms of the progress report. I mean, that I wasn't going to go into more detail around the sort of progress report as a whole. We have included some sector updates there. One of them is around the Financial Reporting Council annual report. And that's effectively, I know we've been talking to Audit Committee over a sort of number of meetings around our firm's investment in quality. I suppose this is the first independent review of how that is tracking. And I think that basically, I'm not going to be in detail, but in summary, it just show that our quality is improving in terms of the overall gradings that the FRC has given us. And I put the quarter ones on there, although they do apply to the NHS more as local government. we're pleased with the results. We're pleased to show that the investment's coming through in our quality, but probably just to say we're not being complacent and we'll continue to invest in quality. But I suppose it's in there just to give yourself some confidence that actually when we do our audit work, you are getting a quality piece of work through for our audit service in compliance with the FRC requirements. I wasn't going to go into details on the sector updates that were in the update report. They're there for your information, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions. Paul, I don't know if there's any updates you want to give in relation to what I've just said.
Can I suggest that if we start off with the page numbers, if I may, so I can ask members if they've got any questions related to what you've just said. Is that all right with you? So we start off with page 11. Are you with us? Sorry. Is that okay with you? So members could have an opportunity just to go through that you've either on the page or what you've just referred to. So if I go to page 11, ask members with any questions on page 11. If not, we can move on to 12.
Yep.
Any questions on 12? Any questions on 13?
Yeah, please.
Councillor Loder, please.
Thank you. It's just in relation to the audit fees. Back in December, Grant, we spoke about the proposed audit fees being 55,444 due to the changes that were impacting from COVID. Are we saying that there's going to be further changes to that audit fee because of extra COVID fees, or what's then the change from?
Yeah, so sorry. So I suppose there's a couple of things here in terms of, I mean, clearly the audit has taken us longer than we would have planned. So there may well be what we would call overrun fees, but we're in the process of working our way through those. In terms of the overall fees, there's just a conversation. I mean, PSA does set a scale fee, but I think as you've picked up, Councillor, the scale fee was varied by us for the increased quality requirements in terms of new standards, in terms of accounting estimates, and also in terms of the greater expectation of scepticism challenged by the FRC. And that's where we got to the 55,000 figure. Those are likely to continue into 21-22. So I think there's in relation to that. So I think as a firm, we've been discussing with PSAA, who run the overall contract, because they will do that moderation across all the firms about where they would expect those parameters to sit. So there will be uplifts to some of that work. I think they call it the rate card, which effectively is increased costs for various works. But then there will be specific work, and that's what I haven't yet discussed with your new Director of Finance in respect of the additional work expected by us this year. You won't be directly affected, but there will be more work required on infrastructure if you had that. But there will be other elements of our audit work where we need to bring that into play. So I suppose there's two figures here. I think the 21-21 fee is likely to vary, but we're working through that at the moment. And then I will come back to you with more details on 21-22, as I say, once we finish those sort of framework discussions, I suppose, with PSAA to make sure we're consistent across our whole client base.
Any supplementary?
Yeah, thank you. But, from that then, so we say about the overrun fees and things like that. Yeah. From what side are we overrunning? Is that from who's accountable for those overrun? Is what I'm asking basically.
I think it's well, I can't speak directly for the council. Clearly, I mean, a lot of it is. I think our request for information and getting it, I suppose, in terms of providing evidence. Some of it's been around sort of getting evidence for valuation. Some of it's just in terms of understanding, I suppose, from our side, getting the relevant and appropriate audit evidence, not going into the depth of that we require it, and then follow-up queries as well. So I think it's primarily just taking longer to get the audit evidence that we need, and I know part of that is the council's investing in its own systems, etc., to improve that information flow. So much of it is around how long it's taking to to agree that, and there have been some technical issues around sort of say reconciling accounts and elements like that. So it's a sort of combination, but primarily it's been taking longer to get the assurance than I suppose we would normally expect it would take, as part of an audit. Paul, I don't know if you've got any specific examples you want to bring into the equation there.
I think one of the main areas that's is kind of flowed in from 1920 is we had issues in the 1920 audit in relation to the collection fund. Those have continued, and as you can see from the progress report, we're still waiting for reconciliation on that. So that's one of the main areas where it's just taken longer for us to actually complete the work. And like I said, we're still undertaking that work.
David, another supplementary covering.
Sorry, I think it's just a case of just trying to understand, and maybe that needs to be a bit more open in communication between the two parties, that where is this accountability for the overrun sitting? Because if you're asking for information, Grant and sorry, is it Mark?
Grant and Paul.
Paul. Apologies, but if you're asking for information and it's from our side that you're not getting that information, or there's a systems thing, we need to then address that from our side, is what I'm saying, because we can't keep going into year on year on year not knowing what fees we're going to be paying because of overruns. Okay, that's what I'm saying.
I agree with that comment, and overruns aren't something that we enter into lightly either. We're programmed to gather audits done as efficiently as possible. I can say, from conversations with your finance team, I know that the council has been looking at this and is investing, and is building resilience within its own team. So that's why, in a way, I'm sort of as comfortable as your auditor that you are responding to the challenges. But clearly, that will take time to come through. But I don't know whether your finance team have a direct response as well. So.
Could I at this stage bring the 151 officer and then Councillor Sharon, please?
Sure, thank you. So just in respect of the question, who is accountable, that would be myself. Clearly, I think it's fair to say everybody here understands the finance team, the pressure that the finance team have been under, and the resource implications, or the resource issues, if you like, that were identified firstly by the Local Government Association when they did the financial health check last year. There have been some significant step changes in terms of the resourcing of that team, and clearly the team are working hard to provide that information to internal audit, but it doesn't happen overnight, I think is kind of the response, and there has been a step change in terms of moving forward, to give you those assurances, we do have everybody focused on this piece of work and trying to ultimately wrap up the last audit and then move forward with the next one.
Councillor Sharon Norris, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was actually going to touch on very much what Councillor David Lloydell has touched on. Sadly, though, I've been here before. Too many times have I been told that we're working on it and we're putting in systems, but we're here again, and this authority doesn't have a lot of money to spare. So having to spend it, with no disrespect to the auditors, but on an audit, excuse me, rather than on a frontline service, disturbs me greatly. I'm just really sad to hear once again that the elections report is giving an issue. And please, can we not have the same thing with the next audit?
Anybody want to comment?
Connie might want to on just in terms of providing a bit more assurance on the ground, so to speak.
You want to come in, Connie?
Yes, Chair. The finance team, obviously it's a new team that's developing. We are working towards meeting the audit deadlines. One of the things I'd just like to mention, obviously over the last 2 years, the audits have been remote. So just in that self, it makes things take longer. And also, I'm correct in saying some of the requirements, like for instance on regarding valuations, have been more intensive because there have been legislative changes, which has, as the grant has mentioned, has required more audit investigation and digging down. So as a council, we are trying to get the systems in place to make things so that we can provide appropriate information, but it's still work in progress, but we are responding as quick as possible to queries.
Councillor Morris, supplementary at all?
No, I don't think so, Chair.
Okay.
It wouldn't add anything to it if I was thinking currently.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Just one for comment. When we talk about budgets and we talk about potential increases, how are you going to mitigate any unforeseen finances if it goes up, or hopefully go down, but if it goes up, are we prepared for
that? Chair, yeah, but I'm expecting there will be some increase in the audit fees. I don't know what the figure is. Obviously, in our budget, we budget for the amount that we're expecting, but I have noted that, and it will be additional pressure on the budget, but it's one we'll be able to cope with.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions on that page? We go to page 14. Any comments on 14, please? Councillor David Lloyd, please.
It kind of just leads on from the previous stuff about talking about overruns and things like that, but what assurances do we have that we are going to meet the next deadline for the audit findings report, the auditor's report and the annual report? Because we're talking about June 22, that's only 3 months away, and if there's any further overruns, that could lead us into then the next cycle and we get closer to that deadline of November 22. What assurances do we have that that is definitely going to be made by the next one?
I can't, it's Grant here, Grant Patterson, I can't give any direct assurances. I just know that, well, our plan at the moment is to work with Connie and Rushpower and the team and to get our substantive audit work complete by, as we say, Easter, in our perspective. And that is driven by the fact of that, in terms of other client bases, we sort of have to move into the NHS by then. So I think the collection fund is probably the bigger area that if that can be resolved, then that really is probably the last big area. And that why I'm reasonably confident is that if we can get our work done by April, then that does give your finance team time to do the final amendments to the accounts, I suppose, in that sense, in May. And then we're confident that we can sort of draft our audit findings report. So I'm as confident as I can be, but I think the collection fund is probably the one that we just need to is the bigger area to resolve going forward. And if that can be reconciled, then I think that's the last bigger area, I suppose, of our audit focus that is outstanding. So if that work progresses, then I'm reasonably I'm confident that we'll be able to finish our work by June. So.
Any supplementary, Councillor? Are you okay with that?
Well, it kind of goes then, the question then goes back to then Connie and Tracy, because obviously the collection fund is this big beast that is not being reconciled yet. So have we got the time to do that? I know we've got the team now, but have we got the time? It's the big one.
That'll be answered by Tracy, please.
Thank you. I mean, the collection fund is an extremely complex accounting concept in itself, and it's something that I'm talking actively with and Connie about. Is actually, do we have currently the skills in house to be able to manage the collection fund on an ongoing basis, without additional support, without additional training, or even buying in and sharing expertise from colleagues from other councils, for example. So it is an area that I'm looking at in detail with colleagues going forward anyway. In terms of wrapping up the previous year's audit, absolutely we have to really focus our efforts on getting this sorted. So that will be a key focus going forward. I mean, I think the other driver, as an incoming Section 151 officer, I think the other thing to say is, the statement of accounts is, of course, extremely important, but it is about compliance. And actually, the statement of accounts doesn't add an awful lot of value to the business of this council. We should be meeting and doing these things as a bare minimum standard, so that actually we can free up our finance professionals to get involved with pushing decisions, moving forward with activities that will add value to this council's operations, bringing in additional income, new income generating schemes, really squeezing the existing fees and charges so that we're getting as much as we should be, and basically reducing our expenditure as much as we can. So there are lots of other things that I would want our finance team to be at the forefront of, and doing all of this work, as the bread and butter, the normal stuff that happens. So just to give you some kind of, I suppose, some kind of assurances of where I think our focus should be and our attention, this, as I say, should absolutely just be met, and we should meet the bar, without really trying. So that's where I'll be getting the team to in time.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any more questions on 15? 16? Any questions on 16? Okay, 17? 18? 19? I think it's just a lot of information that we through 2023. No, that's fine. Is there any questions from anybody else? Ant, is there anything you want to ask us, or any other thing you want to tell us?
No further comments from me. I think probably just one, maybe just to bring members' attention, would be page 20, which was just the SIP for emergency consultation, which in a way does pick up on some of the comments around that comment was saying around scrutiny around our actual audit work around valuation of property, plant and equipment. There was a suggestion to try and drop those those valuation requirements for 21-22. That's not going to happen now. There is a possibility that the IFRS 16 lease standard change will be deferred again to 2023. So that's really just for your attention there. So in essence, it's sort of saying there isn't going to be a lot of change for 21-22. So going forward, that's probably just to draw your attention to that consultation has finished and there aren't any significant changes in that area, which might feed into your conversations when you talk about the accounting policies as well. So.
Okay, thank you for that. When you say that would impact on our policies, is that something that we're aware of?
So essentially, Councillor Lloyd, what the external auditor is referring to on page 20 are two essentially national local government accounting code changes. The government have proposed some kind of sticking plasters to enable the accounts to be produced in a much more efficient and quicker manner, really. So they will be reflected in our accounting policies that are on a separate agenda item. And I think what Grant was saying was the first one, which was around the valuation of property, plant and equipment, actually isn't going ahead for next year's accounts, which actually doesn't impact us because we've instructed our valuers already to commence the valuations of our council-owned assets in readiness of next year's financial statements. And just looking ahead, actually, in terms of next year's financial statements, just to let you know that we have already, of course, we've started with 31st of March being tomorrow, doing all of our close down practices. And Rashpal, who's joined us this evening, is the finance manager, has got a really tight timetable, and she's been meeting with all managers across the organisation to make sure that everybody's doing their bits and we stick to our timetable for producing the 21-22 annual accounts. So more on that to come in due course.
Great, thank you very much. So that's it. the end of that particular item. So can we move on now? Does Grant and his team stay with us, or you finish?
We'll stay, and it's useful for us to understand what else goes on in the committee. So we'll be staying with you for the rest of the meeting.
No problem. Thank you. Okay. Then we go on to item 8.
Sorry, Chair, are you noting
Yes.
general affirmation on that item?
There were two recommendations there, weren't they? So are we all okay with those 2 recommendations, or any?
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me. So item 8, then go on to the internal audit project. That's 24 to 24. Who's taking that one?
Thank you.
Is that Mark, is it?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll present this report. So this just provides progress against the 21-22 audit plan since the last time that this committee received a progress report from myself, which was September. So since then, we have concluded and issued final reports with significant assurance opinions on performance management, risk management, emergency planning and taxi licensing. We've also issued moderate assurance reports on selective licensing and housing repairs and maintenance, as well as certifying the business restart grant scheme in accordance with the terms and conditions that were set down for that grant. We also provide an update on the latest with regard to tracking the recommendations using our online system. So the report summarises each of those audits that I've just been through, providing the level of assurance and some key issues that led us to that assurance opinion. I probably won't take questions on those that we've given significant assurance from at the end, if anyone has any further questions, Chair. But then just briefly to talk about the 2 moderate assurance opinions. I believe we've got Dave Gill here to answer any further questions on selective licensing, and also Chris Eyre on housing repairs and maintenance. If I just briefly go through both of those. So for the selective licensing, we gave it a model.
Before we get to that one, Mark,
Yep.
that one, for members' benefit, if I could do the same as I've done with the previous one, is go page by page to see if there's any questions. I know there's significant ones there which is good news.
Okay, yeah.
They may have an opportunity or may want to say something about them.
That's fine, yeah.
That's okay. So if we can start off with page 27. Any questions from members at all? If not, we'll move on to 28. I think the significant bit, that's how said it all, and that's a positive thing, so thank you for that. But again, the opportunity to raise any questions. 29. Now come on to page 30, which is where sorry to interrupt you, where the 2 moderate ones were. So perhaps if we can continue with that, if that's okay.
That's fine, thanks, Chair. So if we take selective licensing first, so this is for the South Wigston area. I think the key issue here, as with a lot of the audits that we've been undertaking over the last couple of years, is that delivery of the selective licensing scheme was impacted on because of the COVID-19 virus. So I think the original date was May 2020. I think that was put back, and landlords were given extra time to submit their applications up to November 2020. We did this piece of work in around about sort of September through to November of 21. And at that stage, there still were a number of applications that were outstanding, and some enforcement fees that were also outstanding. There were some issues with the income budget that was originally set, perhaps being over-optimistic. And the other main area that we commented on was the need to implement the inspection programme, which was one of the reasons why the selective licensing scheme was brought in, to fund an inspection programme, which I think I'm right in saying was due to get off the ground in the summer of 21. It hadn't really got off the ground by the time we did the audit, but I think it's now work in progress. I don't know if you want to ask any questions at that point, or whether Dave might want to
Can I ask Councillor Courtney to come in, please?
Yeah, Chair. This is the item where we had serious problems in the current year, didn't we? Somebody along in the budget came with an entirely different figure, and we found out that it was overestimating the income quite dramatically, because somebody at some stage had put the wrong figures in, counted it twice or whatever it is. I'm not set for trade, very far from it, but that was a thing that stays in my mind. But my question is, at what stage can we moderate behind as a level of insurance? What sort of timetable do you think we could get out of moderate to significant, and what in fact is the difference for a layperson?
That largely depends on the implementation of the recommendations that were made in the report. The recommendation tracker indicates that the majority of those recommendations have been put in place. I think there's one high-level recommendation regarding getting the inspection programme up and running, which I think the revised implementation date for that is the end of this month. So at this stage, I think perhaps, I don't know whether Dave went on that.
Is it appropriate for Mr Gill to come in at this point?
I think so, yeah.
Mr Gill, please.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the inspection programme, officers are currently working on it. During the period that the audit was undertaken, I think members will be aware that we lost the manager in the selective licensing team, who went on to another job at the city. So we've therefore had a shortfall in staff. We held interviews last week, and we have been very fortunate to appoint a highly qualified officer with considerable experience in selective licensing and houses in multiple occupation. She is due to start at the end of this month, early in next month. The inspection scheme is currently sorry, I've just received a message. I'm not sure whether you can see me.
I can't see. I'm looking for you. I can't see.
I'm here. I can. There's obviously an issue with the software. I'm just going to turn off my camera and then try again, see whether that makes any difference.
There you go.
Yeah, my apologies for that. Yeah, so as I was saying, we've got this new officer due to start. The inspection scheme is currently being worked up and will be ready for implementation. In addition, all 4 of the staff that are working in that area are also now trained to undertake inspections of properties. However, I will add a caveat that you'll also be aware that we are making preparations for the Ukrainian refugee scheme, and part of that process where people come into the country will mean that the properties that they are going to will need to be inspected. And as the 4 officers that I've got are the only 4 officers qualified within the council, I'm afraid there may be a possibility that we actually have to divert the officers to undertake that humanitarian work. And at this stage, we don't know what the impact of that is likely to be on the team. I mean, if there's any more questions. Chair, from yourself or members, I'll do my best to answer them.
Councillor Quinn, I'll come back.
Yeah, well, just for clarification, the officers starting, are you actually saying end of this month, which is March, so they should start sometime in April, or is it going to be May?
My apologies, I've got ahead of myself. I'm thinking it's April already. So it'll be at the end of April, beginning of May that the officer starts.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Sorry, Councillor David, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's just with that in mind, obviously the housing officers being repurposed for the inspections of taking on the people put out of houses in this Ukrainian war. What's then the likelihood of getting this March, the March deadline I'm guessing is then gone by this inspection schedule, and then what's the likelihood of them putting that into play? Are we putting that in the inspection schedule that we're expecting to do this first, and then this is going to come down the line in July time, or how's it working?
Well, the position is that the inspection schedule is worked up with a view to implementing it as soon as possible, and some inspections are already being conducted. Once we have all staff in place, then that will be ramped up. And as I've said, it depends very much on the impact of the refugee scheme. But what I would say is that the majority of refugees are likely to be housed in private rentals in any event, and a lot of those will be in South Wixton because of the sheer number of properties there. So we may actually end up doing killing two birds with one stone, so to speak, so that we can do the inspection for the refugees. Then at the same time, that actually may comply with the requirements for the selective licensing scheme, because there'll be the same properties that are being used.
Any supplementary? Okay with that? Or,
No, that's fine.
Mr. Gill, you mentioned the refugee scheme. I'm assuming that the refugee scheme, it's important that we try and look to help people where we can, especially in the current circumstances with Ukraine. Are we financially viable to be able to help these people?
I think Mrs. Bingham can respond on that one, but it's fair to say that it's being county-led and funding is coming in from government. But I will hand over to Mrs. Bingham.
Sorry.
Sure. So, I'm acting as strategic lead for the organisation in response to the Homes for Ukraine scheme, for which there is central government funding being diverted towards local authorities. At the moment, we're working with county colleagues to understand the split of district council and county council functions, because obviously we work within a two-tier system. For those councils that are a unitary council, obviously they receive the funding and they just sort everything out as one council. So we're going through that process at the moment, and we are anticipating some of that funding coming our way to cover the works that we undertake as part of that scheme.
Right, thank you very much. Any other questions? So, Mr. Gill, just so I'm clear for my benefit, I appreciate everything that you've said. So we're going to reevaluate the progress of inspections and so on. Do you anticipate that then being pushed back or forward, so you're going to put it to early November, that sort of situation, or?
Sorry, Chair, you're breaking up. I couldn't quite catch what you were saying.
Oh, sorry, let me start again. With the situation that we're in at the moment, from an inspection point of view, are you anticipating the deadline for, let's not say completion, but for a start and then completion, is that going to be pushed back to later on in the year, say July, August, November? Is there a plan in place to mitigate the problems that you've identified just now?
The position is that we are currently undertaking some inspections, albeit small in number. When the new member of staff is in place, then that will increase, and we have the schedule which we'll be working to. As I've said, at this stage, we're not sure what the impact is going to be of any additional work relating to the homes for Ukrainians. So I would anticipate that we will have made a rather large dent in those inspections, certainly in the next 2 to 3 months.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Appreciate that. Any other questions on that particular subject, sector licence? Can we go on to housing repairs and maintenance now, please?
Thank you, Chair. So housing repairs and maintenance, again, we're providing moderate assurance opinion. I probably need to put a bit of context around that. So the previous audit on housing repairs and maintenance was undertaken just as lockdown, it was ongoing as lockdown came in back in March of 2020. At that stage, the previous housing manager had worked up a significant improvement plan. There were a number of areas in housing repairs and maintenance that required sort of a root and branches review of the way things were being done and improving controls. So when we've come to do the audit this time round, our starting point was to look at how that action plan had progressed, bearing in mind that, again, some of the targets for delivery on that action plan were impacted on by COVID-19 pandemic. So the action plan's now been sort of adopted and taken forward by the new housing manager, Chris, who's with us this evening. And the approach taken for this audit is to get Chris initially to do a self-assessment. Where are we at on this action plan? For those areas where Chris was confident that action had been taken and there was evidence to support that, that evidence was then shared with my team, and we conducted some testing around that to provide some independent assurance that those where actions had been self-assessed as implemented, that those were supported by evidence that we could independently confirm. I'm pleased to say that that was the case, and that's really enabled us to move from limited assurance through to moderate assurance. We're not quite a significant assurance yet because there still are a number of points on the action plan where action's ongoing and the target dates haven't yet arrived. And I think probably Chris will be able to tell you a little bit more about that.
Is it at this point where I can ask Mr. Ayres to come in and clarify some of those points, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think it's fair to say it has been a bit of a task for the team. We've got a newly formed team, but the work that they've put in over the last year has been tremendous to get us to that position of the assurance we're at the moment. I think it's also fair to say of the remaining actions, a lot of the actions are subject to the main action, which is to procure the services of the repairs service. So the day-to-day repairs, the planned maintenance and the void work, because a lot of the offshoot actions are in respect of processes and procedures, and they will be primarily affected by the type of contract we have with a particular contractor and what have you. So once we've gone through the procurement exercise and got those in place, then the rest of the actions should be relatively easily achieved, because that'll be part of the process that we'll be going through. Happy to discuss any points on that or any questions.
Any questions from members at all? It appears, Ms. Rose, that we're going in the right direction. But when I read the report, it talks about reasonable progress, which is, thank you for that. Functions to address a number of underlying and long-standing weaknesses. No long-standing weaknesses are now short-standing weaknesses. Yes.
Sorry.
We've got, it talks about, congratulations on really well progress, which is down to you and the work you're doing between you. One of the comments in the document is talking about long-standing weaknesses. As though long-standing weaknesses have now been addressed, which has allowed it to move up to moderate.
Sorry, I'm sorry, Chair. Was that a question for me? Kind of.
Oh, actually, Mr. Ayres, you're Mr. Ayres, aren't you? Yeah?
Yes.
That's okay. So do you want to repeat it for you?
Please.
Okay. The papers that you've got papers in front of you. If you haven't, I apologise. But in it, it talks about long-standing weaknesses, underlying long-standing weaknesses. With what your progress now, has that long-standing weakness contributed towards it going into a moderate level or a level moderate assurances?
Chair, I think this is. I think the main weakness is the procurement. As I say, the procurement really does underpin a lot of the actions that, such as processes and procedures that we need to implement. Things like a stock condition survey. So it all interlinks into that procurement. Once we get that procurement bottomed out and awarded, the contract awarded, it should be a relatively quick fix to get the rest of the actions completed and in place.
Okay, thank you for that. I want to ask you a question. Once your procurement's in place from the contractor, are you satisfied, or have you got systems in place that you can monitor it or monitor that contract effectively and efficiently?
Yes, Chair. Chair, I think once the contract's in place, we will have part of that process is that management of performance. I know there's been issues in the past, but we will have a strong and robust process in place for monitoring and managing contracts going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Ayres. That's a very welcome comment. Any comments from members? Anything else, Mark, on that?
I think it's just worth noting that where for the action plan points, for example, Chris has been talking a lot about the procurement exercise and how that underpins other points on the action plan. All of those are now within our recommendation tracking system. So Chris will be able to update myself and more importantly yourselves each time. So if there are any sort of issues with some of those actions still needing further time, that will be flagged up as part of the progress report that you will receive from me each time. So I think that gives some assurance to the committee that you will, by exception, get updates on how we're going with the action plan. If it's not in my progress report that it's overdue, it means it's been done. So you'll see as we go forward in the next 2 or 3 meetings whether that's the case or not.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on page 30? That's been very succinct. I appreciate officers for their time and putting us straight on the progress on that. It sounds quite positive. Thank you. Page 31. Any comments on 31? Still, the comments about still to be completed. On the first chart, it's got 10. Which ones are those? Page 31? Am I reading it right?
Yes, Chair. So there are 10 that whose original implementation dates were by the end of February. The format of the report that's been agreed previously is that we'll provide detail on those, A, if they're high risk, or B, if they're medium risk and more than 3 months beyond the date. So the following two tables provide the details of those types. So there's one high risk, which we've already been talked about, selective licence and inspection programme, and then there are 3 of those 10 that relate to medium risk issues that are more than 6 months from the original implementation date. One of which is the housing income policy, which the latest update is that is very nearly ready to be ratified. But we don't sign it off until it is, basically. And then there are 2 to do with payroll, which are both really in relation to information that we need from the payroll provider, EMSS, which is County Council, and we are chasing them for that information. But those 2 recommendations can only be implemented once we've heard from them that they've A, upgraded their system, and B, that they're going to start providing us with monitoring reports on their performance against the contract.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Coifman, please.
Yeah, so is it right on these revised target dates for 31st of March? Should we put a new target date? Because that's 2 days' time, isn't it? Something like that.
So you moved on to page 32.
I'm on page 33.
Yeah.
And the revised target date is 31st of March. So we're not going to... One, you're waiting from the county council, not your fault. But do we need in that column revised target date to change the revised target date?
This is on page 32. Yeah.
Was it 33?
It's 32 and 33.
32 and 33, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Right.
Well,
you're right, the target dates are there, but
yeah.
With what we've just been told, those target dates now need to be moved.
Yeah, well, I understood that one on page 32, but on page 33, sorry, not there.
Not yet.
Should we put a new target date in? That was all. Not the April one, we'll give you... Because you're waiting to hear from the county council, if I heard right, on the payroll one.
Yep.
And the other one, recovering the rents, isn't it? So you haven't completed those tasks yet. Am I understanding that correctly?
I can speak to the payroll item, so that the item that has a revised target date of tomorrow. So that item we have contacted, so we've written to the payroll service provider and we're actively chasing that, but we haven't had confirmation of that yet. But yes, that target date will need to be extended because as of today it's not been met, and being as tomorrow is the deadline.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Okay.
On the housing rents item, I'll let Chris respond to that point if that's all right.
Chris, the housing rent, page 30.
Yes, Chair. Chair, yes, the policy has completed its draft process and has been sent to our comms team to circulate to internal stakeholders. So I do expect that to go, well, that was sent at the beginning of the week, so that should be circulated imminently.
Okay, supplementary?
Yeah, thanks.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Ayres, for that one. Page 32, which you go about selective licensing, we, from what we've heard, that's the bit that talks about the inspection being developed ready for the end of March, with the general outline being, would that target date would have to change as well, would it? Is Mr. Gill want to answer that one, or? Did you get the
Sorry, Chair, yes, I'm still here. Yeah, I have been informed that it is a work in progress and that the schedule will be completed by the 14th of April. So if you wanted that date changing, that's fine. I think the most important thing that's been alluded to is actually the implementation date of the inspection programme as opposed to the development of the schedule.
Yeah, okay, it's just a matter of record, isn't it? It's fully moved till, as you suggest, April, which is fine. Right. Okay, any questions on 32? 33, Councillor Gordon has asked a question on that. Does anybody have any comments on that? We'll move on to 34. That's Mark. Sorry, that's Mark. That's your schedule or your plan.
Yeah, so that's just a summary of delivery in the year to date. So everything that we haven't already reported on, we are working on, and that includes now payroll and expenses. So at the time I wrote this report, we hadn't yet booked that in. We now have got an agreed engagement letter for that, and we've booked in to begin that work in a couple of weeks' time. So all of those items are progressing, and they'll be delivered within the next month or so. So by the time I come and see you again in June, I think it'll be somewhere around then, I'll be in a position to provide my annual report, which will really pull everything together for the whole year.
Okay, any questions on 34?
No.
Just for my benefit, on IT audit transition out of RCT throughout the year, ongoing NA is on your plan. You've got IT audit transition in. It's got ongoing advice and support NA.
Yeah, so the NA is referring to the fact that that's not an assurance piece of work, so we don't end up providing you a level of assurance on that because that was ongoing advice.
That would apply to the business restart grants, COVID-19, that would be the same?
Yes, they are. They're sort of mandated pieces of work where we have to provide, the Chief Auditor has to provide a signed certification that the terms and conditions of those grants, so it's not a system or a process that that provides an opinion that contributes to our overall head of audit opinion. Different type of work.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Is there any questions on that last page? Okay, with the plan. There being no more questions, we go back to page 24, where there's a recommendation that the progress made in delivering the 21 audit plan be noted. We agree with that. Okay, Sally, all like that? Okay, so we move on to agenda item 9, which is the accounting policy and materiality. Who's saying this, please?
That will be our finance manager, Rashpal.
Rashpal.
Thank you, Tracy.
Okay, Rashpal, if you want to do a report, you're most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Right, this report is to seek committee approval of the accounting policies that will be used in developing the final accounts for 2021 to 2022 and of the limits set in relevance of the same year. This is the first year, I believe, that we brought any materiality or the accounting policies decisions to the committee. It is considered best practice, and it's about engaging the committee properly into the approach of developing any our annual accounts, and you're aware of what accounting policies we're using in that case. We definitely plan to make this a routine going forward, and bringing these annually to the committee. You'll find the accounting policies are included in the Appendix 1, and I think that's from page 38. And then these policies lay out the accounting treatments of items of income or expenses and treatment of assets and liabilities, which underpin how accounts are developed. I think the accounting policies have previously been approved by the head of finance. And then in terms of materiality, which you'll find in Appendix 2, and that's on page 57, so a bit further ahead. That's another one that obviously needs to be reviewed. And the materiality concept states that the financial information is material to the financial statements if it would change the opinion or view of a reasonable person. So in other words, all important financial information that would sway the opinion of a financial statement user should be included in the financial statements. We have set up proposed materiality levels at the lower of 10% of the 2021 balance sheet balances, which were on the draft accounts on our website, or 90% of the external auditor's materiality. Last year's materiality was at 420,000, so the 90% of that was 378, just to clarify what those figures are. So what this means, aside from the nature of the item, the values of the items as laid out in the internal materiality level column will be used to determine materiality judgments internally. I think that's all I have to say. I welcome any comments and questions on these reports. I will try my best to answer them.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any comments? I won't go page by page, because it's a policy document, if you like. But Councillor Cookman, please.
Thank you. Can I ask you to page 53? I think I understand what componentisation means and the way it's dealt with here. But what I don't understand is why Blaby Road Park is in. I can understand, well, I'm not even sure I can understand Wigson Swimming Pool. Brox Hill Visitor Centre is separate because it's in the middle of Brox Hill Park and it's worth more than £1 million, so you have to mention it separately. So if Blaby Road Park is in, the next one down, why isn't that the only park that's in? What is it a component of? If it's just a park, if I understand the explanation here correctly?
Yeah. I'll probably defer, if I may, Chair, defer to Rashpal, because she'll probably be able to give a much more eloquent answer than I would.
Did you get the question?
I hope you understood the question, actually.
Rashpal?
Hi, to be honest, with the Blaby Road Park, I'll have to come back to you on that one. Again, now, with it being my first year, I'm not quite sure how they've actually been componentized. I can actually look into that one and why it is, to be honest, and come back to you on that one.
Can you confirm that I've got the idea right?
So componentisation is actually about the assets. So I would look at that park and I would imagine that there are some further council-owned assets in that park. They might be park benches, they might be statues. I'm not sure, I don't know the park myself.
Bowling green, bowling curb.
Okay.
Football stone.
Okay, so componentisation is about looking at a house as an asset, and if you were going to componentise, you would depreciate that house rather than as a single entity. You'd depreciate that house based on the roof. That might have a useful life of 20 years, for example. The bricks and mortar might have a useful life of 50 years, for example. So it's just about looking at the different accounting life of the different components that make up that asset. So in the example of this park, the fact that it sounds like you've got some individual assets as part of that park, I would assume that they are accounted for on different bases of longevity, basically. But Rashpal, I think it would be good if we got the detail to you and shared that with you outside of the...
Well, I'm looking, it talks about a value greater than £1 million, where the component is more than 25% of the total value. So either all the parks or a lot more parks have got to go in it, or there's something wrong with this, or I don't understand.
Sure.
Happy to hold my hand up. But let's be consistent to make sure it's right at this stage.
Thank you. We'll take that back and we'll make the necessary amendments to the accounting policies on that basis. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think the answer back to that, I think that's quite important to understand how that works. But thank you very much for that question. Thank you for the answer as well. Any other? Any other questions? We move to the back page on Appendix 2, it's on 57. Perhaps look at the balance sheet, just to, for my benefit, just to clarify or give an example of what you mean by 10% and 8%. Look at the property, plant and equipment, PPE. Just talk me through that, that equation, if you don't mind, please.
Shall I'll start off the response, if that's okay, Councillor Lauderdale, and I'll pass over to Rashfeld. But the methodology, if you like, or the reason why we look at materiality is covered on page 37 and paragraph 3.2, which states that setting materiality levels enables the finance team to identify significant variances and items that need disclosing in the financial statements. So if you like, the materiality level is for us internally to define on a value basis what is important. So materiality is ordinarily not just about the value of something, but for the purposes of the accounts, obviously we're putting together financial transactions. We do focus somewhat on a value. And Rashfeld, do you want to take the committee just through that approach, if you like, on page 57 for PPE?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed the question. It's really bad I couldn't hear the question, to be honest, Tracy, so that was the reason I didn't reply. Is it just what was the question in terms of just the process of how we've actually
Yeah, it's just all of the different, on page 57, taking PPE as an example, what are different balances, and then you referred to it in your introduction about we go with the lower of, but can you just take the committee through that methodology again?
Yeah, I apologise, I couldn't hear clearly, I'm sorry. Yes, in terms of how we actually deter what is material or not, is basically, if I take PPE, like Tracy said, in our last year's balance sheet, it was at, the balance was 97,198. So we've taken that as a starting point. Then we've set the material level at 10%, so 9,720. Our external materiality level is at 420,000, which we've used last year as well. And that's there. Then we've taken 90% of that, which is 378,000. And then the last column is where we look at the lower of the two columns, and whichever's the lower is the one we actually take. It just means that we're actually checking for more transactions to make sure our accounts are accurate. And so in that case, it's 378. And you use the same methodology all the way through the debtors, short-term creditors, long-term provisions, pension liability. We do it all through the balance sheet, the same methodology. Does that make sense? Or is that clear or?
Clear.
I'll contemplate it and do the maths myself. Yes, thank you. Right. Any questions on that? Any further questions? Let's have a look then. Thank you. Again, we'll go back to that's the end of that particular agenda item, item 9. We've got recommendations 1 and 2. Read them for yourself, but committee consider and approve those item 1, 2 and 2. Can we approve or consider and approve them? Are members okay with that? Yes.
Sorry, Chair, can I just have a proposal and seconder, please? Just
a second for that.
Yes, please, yes.
Simply because it's consider and approve. That's because of the approved bit.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll agree with from the chair then. Do I have a seconder for that?
Second.
Councillor David will second that. So obviously you want to vote. All those in favour, please show. Unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rashfeld, for your input. Very helpful. Thank you. Agenda item 10, which is the Strategic Internal Audit Plan 22, 23, 24, 25. Who's taking this, please? Mark, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll do a very brief introduction, and then if you want to go through the page by page approach with this. So the public sector internal audit standards require us to agree a strategic audit plan over a 3-year period, which enables us to then do a sufficient body of work to provide our annual head of audit opinion, which in turn contributes towards the annual governance statement. So that's the reason for the plan. This plan links everything that we do to your strategic corporate risks and your priorities, and also has been through a review process with Tracy and then with the senior leadership team as well, to ensure that everyone's happy that the coverage that we're proposing over the next 3 years is sufficient to provide the assurance required.
Bit of colleagues, we'll start from page 61. That's the diagram, the summary of the deliverables. Are there any questions on that, please? Page 62, are there any questions on that? I ask on page 62, conclusion. I'm assuming the conclusion there is therefore presenting the audit committee for final consideration and approval. That's in the recommendations at the front, I assume. Yeah.
So yes, yeah, we will require formal approval on that. Yeah.
Is that a separate approval then to the one that's on the recommendations? That's what I'm asking. Or is it the same?
No, it's just the one approval.
Okay. 63. Any comments on 63? That's the strategic internal plan again. Looking around, any comments from anybody? No. Let's turn the page on 64. Any comments on that? I put on here on the management and advice, audit needs assessment, planning and annual report. Could you just explain that, please?
Yeah, so there is some time in the plan to manage the delivery of the overall audit plan, so time spent pulling together this plan, which requires the audit need assessment, which is wrapped up in the plan really, and is based on mapping your corporate risks to audits that need doing, and then obviously the annual report as well. So I spent time pulling together the annual report and then presenting it to yourselves. So that's what that time is there for. Yeah.
That's fine. Any questions? Excuse me, 65. Any questions on 65? 66, 68. Sorry, I'm on the page. Excuse me. 66. No. 67. 68. 69. 70. 71. No. 72. And page 73. Excuse me. Any questions at all? Members? No? Go back to the recommendations to approve strategic internal audit plan for 22, 23 to 24, 25. Because, again, the word approve, I can read it from the chair. Do I have a second, please?
Second.
That's a show of hands. Thank you very much. All those in favour, please show. Unanimous again. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Any other questions at all? Anybody got anything to say before we close the meeting? No? Okay, thank you very much for everybody attending. It's been very helpful. Hope you enjoyed it, if that's the right word. And I look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you very much for all the meetings will close. Thank you.